Well, it's been 22 hours, and to this date and this time, Russian Vince has seemingly not answered the call. So I'm going to go ahead and count him out for
Shocking.
the meeting in Florida. Yes, it comes to a shock to no
I'm
one,
stunned.
literally
He's
no
stunned.
one. But yes, tonight we are super excited for our guest who is joining us. Scott Clifton was born in Los Angeles, California. He is a daytime Emmy Award-winning actor 3 times, I believe. Is that correct?
Yeah. I stole
Best
them
known
all,
for his
but
nice. Best known for his work in the long-running American soap operas General Hospital, One Life to Live, and The Bold and the Beautiful. Also recognized for his YouTube persona, Theoretical Bullshit. He has cultivated a following in the online world of critical thinking and debate, and it is a pleasure to have him here with us tonight. Welcome, Scott Clifton.
thank you. That was such a nice intro. And can I just say, I really, really enjoyed your opening music. That was it was
Thank you.
rhythmic. It had a good drive to it, a good beat to it. I was nodding my head along with it. That alone is worth tuning in, I feel.
Kyle actually
Well,
wrote
thank
all
you.
that, believe it or not. That is
If
all original.
you,
by him.
yeah, thank you.
Really? That's so cool.
If for those of you out there watching, if you are interested in the music, you can actually go to iTunes, Spotify, iCloud, or any of your other musical platforms that you're a part of, and listen to the soundtrack. There are 16 different tunes that we use for the intro and the outros and all that sort of stuff. So it's all on there for you to listen to, whether you want to buy it or listen for free. It's all there. You can find it just by Googling it. But yes, Steve, would you please kind of introduce what we're going to be talking about tonight and the direction we're going to be going? And then I have a question before we jump into the deep stuff for Scott.
Okay.
You have the question first, or
Yeah, we can do that.
yeah,
I hinted to this prior to us going live, but you tweeted probably one of the greatest tweets ever 2 days ago when you said that when you said that you were brought to tears by reading a Dr. Seuss book, and that would let us know how long you would make it in Westeros. I assume that you are a Game of Thrones fan, right?
I'm an unabashed. Just the degree to which I am a fan is pitiful, actually. No, I don't get to claim that. That's disingenuous because I haven't read the books, and anybody who's read the books would look at me and say you're not really a fan. So I don't get to claim I'm like a mega fan, but I really think it's one of the greatest achievements in television filmmaking of my lifetime, at least.
Oh, easily. And you said something that was really well said before we went live. And I'd like for you to, if you don't mind, saying that again about the sort of give and take that people have and the connection that they have with TV shows now.
Yeah. I was just because we were talking about how was it Steve who hasn't seen it? Who's never?
I watched the first season. Okay, I did watch the first season, but at the time when I watched the first season, things were going on. I really probably didn't get the full gist of it. I guess I just saw there was boobs involved and said, okay, this might be of interest to me. But the storyline seemed decent, but I just really couldn't get as much into it as I should have. So I will attempt to try it again and binge watch it. I binge watch things. I binge watch like first seasons, like the whole 8 to 12 things at once, right? I do it over in a couple days, right? Yeah. So I might take the time to do that. If you guys suggest it to me, I'll take your word for it.
I suggest it. I'm not one of those guys. I'm not going to call you crazy for having watched a season of it and not gotten into it. It is Game of Thrones is a very slow burn, and you kind of suffer a lot in the beginning, and you're rewarded for that suffering later on in a really big way. But this is what I was talking about before we went live, is that there's a kind of, I think I called it like a television zeitgeist thing going on now, where I think maybe it started with Lost, but you see it a lot in shows like Game of Thrones and Westworld now, where there's a culture behind it that you're not supposed to just sit back and be entertained and not have to think. You are the amount of thought that you're willing to put into it is proportionate to the reward that you're going to get back from it. So I would say, especially with something like Game of Thrones, there's a lot of names, there's a lot of locations, there's a lot of exposition in the dialogue that talks about the history of the show and the history of the characters. And it's almost like attending like one of those murder mystery dinners where you have to really pay attention to what everyone is saying and what the relationships are between everyone, because there are, huge moments, huge reveals even that will just fly right over the head of a casual viewer. So, and they do this on purpose. They don't hold your hand. You really have to work to enjoy the show. But if you do, it's supremely rewarding. And so I think that's kind of a new thing now. I don't think we've had a lot of that before culturally in our television shows.
And you said something absolutely correct. I just want to extend it a little bit, where you said that if you suffer a little bit in the beginning, you'll get rewarded later on. But then one of the trademarks of Game of Thrones is that they will instantly make you suffer again and 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 again.
Yeah.
And you're still suffering.
So it's an investment. It's an investment of emotion and time, right? I mean, you do get emotionally involved with characters. Maybe like you said, I think Scott probably said the best, that, I want to get involved with these types of dramas, but I don't like the slow approach. I like to jump in, and obviously that would take that's what it has 8 seasons now, I believe, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of storylines going on. Yeah. So I mean,
yeah.
Let me give you a similar one that I particularly liked. It only was, I think, 3 seasons long, but it was really good. It was mostly entertaining. I ever watched Da Vinci's Demons?
Oh no, I thought you were going to say The Leftovers, which was also 3 seasons and
did I watch
the same kind of people who did. Anyway, sorry. Yeah, go ahead. Da Vinci's Demons.
No, Da Vinci's Demons is really good. It's about the Medici family, in the Pope's relationship to Medici's, and Leonardo da Vinci, and it's just a brilliantly written series. So if it's anything like that, then I could probably get into it. But that only was 3 seasons. But the thing was, it ended, right? And so I don't like getting emotionally involved with shows that get canceled or get ended. I guess going into the first season, I was like, okay, whatever. Now it's 8 seasons later, so maybe I thought that in mind too, because everything I like seems to get canceled. It's just the way it is. I don't know what it is. I think they call me up and they, hey, Steve, you like this? I go, yeah, I like this. Okay, we're canceling it. Okay.
My advice for you, Steve, is to not get personally invested in any character. If you start watching,
they all die, don't they? That's the only thing I know. It's like everybody. It's like Walking Dead. Everybody could die
for you, but
yeah. That's why I stopped watching Walking Dead. Yeah, no spoilers.
Okay. All right, Steve. Tell us about what we're going to be diving into here.
Well, I was hoping we kind of dive into. Yeah, I don't really know either. Here's the thing. Look at people may remember you way back when you actually had a lot of videos out on. Can I tell you the guys that? Yeah. Okay, so you went by theoretical bullshit, which was I guess your way of talking about philosophy on YouTube, right?
Yeah,
and you had a lot of great arguments. What's that? Go ahead.
Sorry, there's a lag, and it's hard for me to tell when I'm actually interrupting you rudely. So I'm sorry about that. I was just saying, it started out as a kind of just a sort of counter apologetics channel, and then it kind of broadened into more philosophical stuff that didn't necessarily have to do with Christian apologetics.
No, but you brought up a lot of back in the day. I mean, your channel goes back a while. So back in those days, there wasn't a lot of counterpoints to a lot of apologetics. I mean, you go back 7, 8, 9, 10 years or so. And so back then, when you had people running these scripts, and again, I'm not an atheist, I'm not anti-theist, I'm agnostic, but I do know a little bit about philosophy. And so when you had people like Matt Slick running these narratives, there wasn't a lot of people out there that had enough knowledge to go, wait a minute here. This is not really a good argument, Matt. Let me explain to you why. And also William Lane Craig has some really bad arguments, and some other people, but you actually were able to break it down and go, hey, look, this is why this is not necessarily a good argument. This is why people tuned into your channel and watched your videos. But I've always wondered, where did you get that knowledge from? I don't know what your philosophical background is, but you had a really good in-depth working understanding of these topics to really eviscerate them brutally so.
Oh, thank you. You're being a little too generous to me. I'm actually I'm a high school dropout, so I have no formal education in this stuff. The reason I sort of gravitated toward philosophy and theology and stuff like that was that where I lived growing up, I lived in the Valley, the San Fernando Valley, where I was born and raised there. And when I was around 8 or 9 years old, we had a really big earthquake. It was the earthquake of 94. And our house was totaled. And the San Fernando Valley, this is like a sort of, a very secular, liberal area. But even though I live in Southern California, there are pockets of religiosity. And where we had to move from there was a town that was deeply evangelical. I mean, all of my new friends, all of my teachers, all my friends' parents, I mean, everybody was an evangelical Christian. And that just became my new life. And I was not, I'm not like reacting to any kind of religious upbringing. I was raised in a pretty secular household. My parents were philosophical, but they were more into Eastern philosophy. So I had books on like Taoism and Zen Buddhism and stuff like that lying around the house. But I really didn't understand much about Western philosophy at all until I got to this new town. And I was surprised to find out that people really took this stuff seriously, because I had kind of assumed, I was 8 or 9, but I had kind of assumed that Jesus and God and heaven, was analogous to Santa Claus. It's something that parents tell their children to keep them in line, and then you kind of grow out of it. I was peripherally aware of religion, but not, I didn't understand how seriously people took it. And so suddenly all my new friends find out that I'm a non-believer. I don't think the word atheist was even in my vocabulary at that point, but I became a sort of practice dummy for, evangelism and Christian apologetics. And all my friends were handing me The Case for Christ and Evidence That Demands a Verdict by Josh McDowell. And they're telling me you need to read the Bible. And I went to church with them and youth group, like almost, every week, twice a week, because that was the only, it would have been the only social outlet, for me to have. And so I became really immersed in this kind of culture. And it got to a certain point where the pressure was so much that it wasn't enough for me to say, hey, sorry guys, I'm not buying what you're selling, and leave it at that. So at some point I picked up a Bible. I mean, I had been given so many Bibles by that point. I had like a stack of Bibles that people had just given me because they thought it would do the trick. So I started reading the Bible, and I read all those counter-apologetic, or not those apologetic books. And then I started having to think about it and testing that out, in conversations with pastors and parents of my friends. And then once I would get my ass handed to me. I would be asked a question that I didn't have the answer to, or given an argument that I didn't know how to respond to. And I would walk away with my tail between my legs. And then I'd have to think about it and figure out whether I was wrong about something, or I just didn't have the right answer. And if I didn't, what would be the right answer? Or if I missed something, or if there was a false premise somewhere in what I was responding to. So and over and over and over again, it was just a long, brutal, embarrassing process of getting humiliated and then coming back just a little bit wiser. And there's only so many, permutations of those kinds of conversations you can have. And unfortunately, there's really no amount of intelligence that will just a priori make you good at responding to a lot of these arguments. You just become familiar with them. And it's like somebody who's really good at chess. I mean, there's only so many combinations of moves you can make. And yeah, there's an infinite amount, I suppose, but you get familiar with patterns, and that's really it. I mean, that's it. I'm not, I never studied philosophy. It's just conversations with people smarter than I, and me kind of picking it up and being driven enough and stubborn enough to want to keep having the conversation and getting better and better at it, because it was interesting to me.
Well, let me tell you the impact real quick, Steve, because as soon as I put this on Twitter that you were coming on, this was the first response to that tweet. And this is from Darth Calculus. He says, I used to watch his videos. The only person I saw who answered William Lane Craig at the time, and then I lost track of him. When I learned he was on a soap opera, I was like, well, that's a change of gears. He was the firstest, smartest atheist I ever saw.
Aw, that's so nice. Great, great handle, by the way. What was it? Darth Calculus? That's cool.
Darth Calculus.
You know, it's first of all, I don't know if people know this, but I actually lived in Northridge. In 1994, there was an earthquake in Northridge. It was a very, very huge earthquake. I wasn't in Northridge at the time, but I lived in Northridge. Yeah, I lived literally on Winnetka Street, if you know where that's at.
Well, of course. Were you okay?
Yeah. I was in Indio, California at the time in 1994, which is not. It's a decent, I don't know, 100 some miles away from Northridge, but we definitely felt it. There was no question about it. It was a 6.7 magnitude earthquake. So I do remember that. There was one before that, 1970, the Landers one. That was a big one when I was born. But yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that because I remember Northridge very, very well. I grew up in that area. But going back to what you were saying, how you learned about these things by trial and error, which is kind of funny because I had kind of the same experience back in the day. Do you remember when Presup hit the scene, right? These presuppositionists and these presup argumenters would come in, and atheists didn't know what the hell to make of this stuff. They were like, what is this Psi 10? And by the way, I think we're going to try to tag Psi 10 Bernicate. He's a friend of ours. He doesn't really do much on YouTube every so often, but he happens to like me a lot. And so occasionally I might be able to talk him to come in. And if you want to have a conversation with Psi 10.
Oh, what does that say about you, Steve?
I like Psi 10. What can I say? I like engaging with him. It's like jousting, tit for tat. It's like chess, even though he's not as good as he thinks he is. But when I first got into the whole philosophical thing for the presuppositional argumentation, I was like you. I was like, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. I'm getting stomped by these guys, and there's got to be a defeater of these things. I don't know what's really going on here. But then, as you said, there's only so much of the script, and there's only so many things, and you learn. Oh, okay. And then it's almost like trivial to debunk a presupper at this point. Is that what happened to you?
I mean, there's sure, but to me, the bar can't just be me feeling satisfied with my answer to an argument or a question. The bar, I mean, otherwise, like you just said, it does become trivial. The bar has to be giving the presuppositionalist, in this case, pause. And that when that happens, that's very rewarding. Now, no rational person should expect that pause to stick, or at least just on principle, you shouldn't expect it to. And you walk away, and usually they might come back, just like I would have. They might come back stronger or with a better answer for that next time or whatever. But presuppositionalism was around before I knew it was called presuppositionalism too. And I think that's true for a lot of us. I mean, I remember so I'm 34 now. I remember when I was 15 using America Online, to go into chat rooms and I would like try to test myself out. And I would, go into a Christian chat room and I would say, hey, I'm a non-believer, convert me for free, and a lot of people would jump on that. And those were fun conversations to have. But my first encounter with what I now know in retrospect was presuppositionalism, was this anonymous user that just started asking me, what are your epistemic foundations for rationality? And and I'm like 14, 15, and I'm going, huh? What is? I didn't even know what epistemic meant at the time. So, presuppositionalism seems designed to leave the interlocutor like a deer in the headlights, but. Again, like you just said, there is a script. There's absolutely a script, and the most fun is when you can knock them off the script, and then they try to go back to the script in a way that's like jamming a square peg into a round hole, and you can see that it's not fitting, and they know it's not fitting, and then you've kind of moved forward in the conversation a little bit because you get to say, listen, do you see how this is not applying to our current conversation? Do you see how you're stuck with these same, canned responses? Do you see how that doesn't work? Do you see how we're not progressing here? And so, I
do remember AOL days, definitely. On the whole precept thing, though, did you ever hear Greg Bahnsen, what he said about presuppositional argumentation? He actually said that the precept argument isn't an argument, and he was one of the leading presuppers. Him and Antil and who was the other one? there's Bonson, Vento, and Clark. So he actually said that the whole purpose of presuppositional argumentation was not to even put forth an argument. It was to shut down the non-believer. It was to shut the mouth of the non-believer, is what he said. So it was just basically rhetoric. That's all it is.
Well, his whole thing, I mean, Bonson, there's a camp. I mean, I think it's a large camp, and the difference is just how much emphasis they put on this. But I think most presuppositionalists also happen to be Calvinists, and they also happen to believe that non-believers are insincere. And so, which of course raises the question, isn't presuppositional apologetics like a misnomer? But Bonson, I mean, it wasn't his whole thing that, there is no middle ground. It is impossible to find a middle ground. We are always operating from the assumptions of our worldviews, and it's impossible not to. And so conversation is just a non-starter. And this is why, it's not about having a debate. It's about shutting down the non-believer. Of course, that's ridiculous, because presuppositionalism at its core is an internal critique. So if you can make an internal critique of the opposing worldview, then already you've left your own worldview in order to critique the other one. The hypocrisy of presuppositionalism seems to be that internal critiques of presuppositionalism are not allowed, whereas presuppositionalists are allowed to make internal critiques of non-belief.
And that's one of the biggest complaints I've always brought to the table too, is that they're doing an internalist approach, and that they keep switching. You'll see them switch between internalism and externalism. And they'll try to make it very subtle, but you can't do an internalist to theirs, right? So, but they have this weird thing where they're like, okay, well, I'm doing an internalist approach, and all of a sudden they'll be equivocating into some kind of externalist approach, and it's like, wait a minute here, stick with one kind of thing here. Don't be switching back and forth. But it really doesn't get you anywhere, because they have a lot of equivocations with things like knowledge. They wanted to invoke some kind of, hey, look, you have epistemic uncertainty. Well, yeah, so what? I think we all do. I think presuppers do as well. I think they just move the goalposts back, because what they try to do is they say, hey, look, I have a God here. I have a deity here, and he tells me things in a way that I can be certain. I can't be wrong. Therefore, I am to do things like I'm justified to use induction, right? So I've just solved Hume's problem of induction by positing God can tell me that the rules of nature will be the same tomorrow. The rules of inference will be the same tomorrow. Laws of logic, okay, they work. But it is just a shell game, because they're just positing something by fiat, and it doesn't explain anything. It's not explanatory, and it doesn't really resolve it. I mean, you've decimated Matt's tag argument on this numerous times, because his argument is just so fundamentally wrong, and yet he won't capitulate on it. He still runs it. He still thinks it's a very good argument, even though.
Well, Alex, I can see Matt. My argument was a little different than. I wasn't talking about internalism or externalism, mostly because Matt doesn't talk about that stuff. Mine was more taking him to task on the ontology of these, supposed logical absolutes, which is not a real thing in philosophy. Logical absolute is just something made up. That's not it's not a real concept. And so it was okay. So if these logical absolutes are this, then it entails this, which is a problem for you. If they're this, then it entails this, which is a problem for you. I can understand. I mean, that is abstract enough for someone like Matt to kind of shut that down and walk away from it and go, yeah, he just doesn't get me. Fine, fair enough. He'd be wrong, I'd argue, but fine. Somebody like Alex Malpass, it is as clear and unequivocal and inarguable as it's possible to be. I mean, his refutation of Matt, of Tag, is you have to be. This is going to sound really bad. I'm so sorry. You have to be stupid in a way to think that Alex has not completely refuted the argument. There's just no room for argumentation. The only wiggle room there is the degrees to which you understand Alex's argument. That's it. There's no rejoinder to his thing.
It is bulletproof. I mean, his argument's bulletproof. I mean, there's just absolutely no getting around it. You have to be intellectually dishonest to or like you said, just you don't understand the material because his argument is so very, very, very sound. I think we have somebody dropping in here, by the way.
Yes, this
Hi.
is Scott. Scott,
Hi.
this is a really good friend of ours. This is Shannon. We were talking earlier, and she was saying how big of a fan that she was, and how she had some questions that she might want to.
She's the
ask.
inquisitive type.
I am
Before
the
we,
inquisitive type.
Yes, we love Shannon. Shannon is our resident. How would you put it, Shannon? You're our sane keeper.
Oh.
You keep the sanity around
There we
here.
go.
Yes,
Wow,
right.
she's the gatekeeper of sanity. Man, we are screwed.
I have
That's for sure.
I have an important thing that we need to get out of the way, though, because the live chat is literally screaming and asking questions. Even though I've already answered it, I'm gonna let Scott explain. They are wanting to know about the animal that is directly behind you, Scott. Could you give them a little info about?
Yeah. This is there's actually two animals. The other one is like just off camera. But this is Walter White. Hey, Walter, you wake up for a second, buddy?
It's like, no. I refuse.
See, now that was a show that I actually liked. I watched all those episodes. They were very good. I think that was one of the best shows on TV, actually.
It was great. Well, actually, I didn't name him for the color of his coat. I caught him dealing meth, and so I decided.
I'm telling you, those cats, you got to watch out for them every so often. Yeah. They like to make an extra buck now and then.
That's
he's
awesome.
Actually he's interesting because he was we did I work on a for those who don't know, I work on a soap opera. You said that. And we did a pet adoption storyline where a character adopts a stray cat, and the show had to get like an actor cat to play the role, and so they went to the South Los Angeles Animal Shelter, which is a really, really lovely place, and they found him, and we used him on the show, and then the show came to me, and they were like, "Hey, listen, either this cat is going back in a cage when we're done with him, or you can adopt him." And I was like, "Fuck you! That's not fair."
That, right? Yeah. First of all, that's a guilt trip, but that's a good guilt trip.
Yeah,
that's a good
no,
guilt trip.
It wasn't. I'm making my show look really bad. No, they were very cool about it, and they handled everything like super ethically. But yeah. So I was like, "No, I can't do this. I can't have enough," because I had two cats at the time already. And then I met him on the day, and I was like super protective of him and like really finicky. And I was like, "Don't hold him like that. He doesn't like that." And everybody was like, "Okay, it's your cat."
Good thing it wasn't like an episode with a zoo and it was a white tiger they were talking you into adopting or something. Hey, here's a white tiger. You want to take it home with you?
That is adorable.
Those things are
we are towards the
man.
end I have some questions about the show that you work on now and how you kind of got into that and some things to do with that. But Shannon, do you want to go ahead and I know you had some rally questions.
Yeah, I do. So, something that I like to nice to meet you, Scott. Hi, I'm Shannon. Nice to meet you. So I one of the things that I grapple with the most, that I find the most difficult to kind of articulate when I'm in these sort of discussions, is the conceptualization of morality. And I really feel like you do a good job of arguing for it. So I was hoping that I might be able to see if you can explain as succinctly as possible. I know there's only so much time, what your position is, and I might be able to ask some questions in order to help me kind of suss conceptualization up. So for the record, I consider myself kind of a subjectivist, and I exist in this realm as well, and I carry on conversations with theists of all ilks on a relatively consistent basis. I'm not really a debater, I'm more of a conversationalist, and it comes up quite frequently, and I think I do an okay job of articulating it, but I could use a few more arrows in my quiver, so I was hoping I might be able to engage a bit in that conversation with you.
Yeah, wow, thank you. You may not I mean, you sound like you're kind of familiar with my views a little bit already, but you may not buy wholesale, my view on morality, especially if you consider yourself a subjectivist. Okay, so I think there's two ways that we can talk about morality, or at least think about it, and I call them like top down versus bottom up. Top down is you already have this kind of intuitional concept of morality. We have this concept in our heads of right and wrong. We all kind of vaguely know what each other's talking about when we use these words, even though once you pop the hood and look underneath, it gets a little tricky and there's some sticky stuff in there. But we all kind of we all agree that there's this concept at least. Now, what do we do with it? And so you work from the top down and you go, okay, what's the best theory that accounts for our intuitions and the world and science and facts about the universe that makes the most sense of this concept that we already have? Okay, fine. The other way is what I get, for lack of a better term, I call a bottom-up approach, which is to say, I don't care so much about words like right and wrong. That's not real estate that I'm like dying to stick a flag in and keep there. You can have the word ought, you can have the word right, wrong. None of that shit matters to me. And what matters to me is, in my case, maximizing the flourishing and happiness and well-being of conscious creatures and minimizing the unnecessary suffering of conscious creatures. So I like to make that distinction, because when you get into conversations with, somebody who's a deontologist or somebody like William Lane Craig, for example, that you get to this place where they say things like, well, that's not real morality. That's your subjective definition of what morality is. But then I like to say, well, that's okay, but we're both offering a subjective definition. I mean, we can assign any meaning we want to any string of consonants and vowels. That's not really the question we're talking about. So, okay, that said, I believe one of these days I have a fantasy of having a moral philosopher interview me and telling me what the label is that applies to me, because I actually don't know.
Okay.
The thing that seems to differentiate me from a lot of folks is that I make a distinction between moral facts and moral obligations. I think moral facts are real. I think there are objectively true moral facts. I think it is objectively true. So it just depends on what you mean by moral, right? So, yeah, okay. So
I agree.
So
I
when
agree
I
with
say
him.
when I say something is right or wrong, I mean something very specific by that. When I say that rape is wrong, what I'm actually saying about rape is that it causes unnecessary suffering to conscious beings. That's objective. That is not a claim that is contingent on my opinion or my thoughts. If my brain stops working, that fact isn't less true. It's an objective fact about subjective mental states. And so to rape someone is objectively to cause them suffering, right?
So how do you counter it when you get to that? That's where it starts to become mucky for me, because I understand, if you want to win a race, you ought to run fast. I got that one from Steve, actually.
Right.
I understand getting there.
That's a hypothetical, but hang on, that's not a categorical. That's hypothetical imperative. So, but yeah.
Okay, but that's okay.
But how do you get to, a goal? A necessary goal is that you want to win that race, for example. So how do you get to the point where you justify that a necessary goal is to prevent harm and cause flourishing? How do you justify that subjective? That's where I get clouded into subjectivity, because essentially the best that I can say is I personally believe that is the best goal, and by a consensus, most other people almost invariably will agree with that. However, that's where it starts to become mucky, because I really don't have any further justification. I can't drill down at any, and that's what I think. That's where it starts to become cloudy for me. So, I get your perspective, but I'm looking for more justification than that, so that I can help solidify and better understand why that makes it objective.
Yeah. Okay. So that right there is why I and I'm doing this because I want my worldview to be more defensible. I mean, that's ultimately the goal for all of this shit. But
Same.
that's why I make a distinction between moral facts and moral obligations. And when most of the people, when they talk about moral obligations, unlike what Steve just said, which is like a conditional obligation, like, yes, you ought to eat strawberries if you want to be healthy. You ought not drink battery acid if you don't want to die. These are, of course, conditional obligations upon a desired outcome, right? But then if you say, yeah, sure, we ought to treat people this way or that way in order to have a happy, healthy, flourishing society, somebody like William Lane Craig is going to come in and they're going to say, but that's conditional upon a desired outcome. I'm looking for a moral obligation where there is no condition. You just ought to do X, period, end of story, and that's it. Yeah. Well, I think that's bullshit. I don't think such a thing is even coherent, let alone existent. I don't think you can derive so-called moral obligations from Christianity any more than you can from naturalism. I think it is an inherently incoherent concept, but we don't actually need it. In the same way that we don't need medical obligations in order to have medicine. It's objectively true that there are things that are unhealthy. It's objectively true that it's unhealthy to drink battery acid. That we don't need there to be, and this is just based on facts about our biology, facts about our psychology, and also objective facts about what we subjectively want. So yeah, I think you can still talk about morality. You can say that there are moral facts. To say that something is a moral fact is to say, for me, that it's a fact about what contributes to a happy, healthy, prospering society. And the idea that you need this unconditional outside-in, capital O obligation to which we are binded, it doesn't make any sense to me, and I don't think you can even reconcile that. So I think we're all on even ground when it comes to that. The question is who can come up with the best theory of moral facts, because for me, moral obligations are out the window. That's just not even worth talking about because it doesn't make any sense. So if I'm in your case and somebody says, well, yeah, okay, but how can you objectively say that a psychopath ought not murder a girl if murdering her makes him happy and healthy and that's just what he wants to do? Well, okay, a psychopath is a psychopath. I mean, that diagnosis exists because it's the exception to the rule. It's not normal psychological behavior. And Who's a psychopath? Who's saying?
He's pointing at
Kyle,
and that's fair. No, it's fair though. It's fair.
Well, I'm 90% with him so far. There's 10% I am going to disagree with him on when he's finished. And by the way, for somebody who says I haven't been in the game for a while, my God, he's like still knows his shit better than 99% of people we deal with. So this is pretty impressive. I just disagree with him on more obligations.
I have some clarification questions too, if you don't mind.
Jump in.
I take over conversations. You don't know me, but I do that. So
this is her channel now. We don't even know what the hell we're here for. It doesn't really matter. We just show up to look pretty. That's it.
Q and non-sec stands for.
Shannon's hair is better than mine today. I will admit that. Yeah. So I'm going to give you that today, Shannon.
I brushed it. I brushed it twice, actually. So it sounds to me as though you're making morality tantamount to flourishing and prevention of harm. So it's almost as though the term morality would be interchangeable with those conceptualizations in order for your argument to be the case. So the definition of morality is where you're deriving that argument from. For that are to have any efficacy, the definition of morality would have to be betterment for society, reduction of harm, and flourishing. So you could essentially say that morality is that then. And when you say that morality is that, then everything else starts to fall into place. So it's the conflation in terms when you hear more people argument
Shannon, you're choppy. You might want to
Yeah, you're,
refresh.
you're chopping up, so it's really
Am I? I'm
difficult.
so sorry. Here, I'll
Yeah.
refresh.
Oh, you're
I'm
fine.
sure Steve has things to say.
Hit
I'll come back.
No,
you're
I'm pretty sure I
definitely chopping.
what you're putting down.
Well, she's arguing real quick, so you do hear her properly. She's arguing that once you say that like you want to promote amoy, you want to promote human flourishing, then she's equating morality to be that, and I'm not quite sure that that's really the case,
No, I'm
right?
not. I'm not
yeah.
equating them. I wasn't
Okay.
equating them myself. I'm just trying to better understand his position. So can you hear me a little bit better first before I start? Thank you.
Yeah, and I did understand everything you just said. So if you want me to respond to that, I will. But if you have more, go ahead.
Yeah, I got a little distracted for a second because my computer is garbage, so I apologize for that. So it seems to me that in order for that argument to have efficacy, I think what I was saying was that morality had to be tantamount to those things. Like they would almost have to be interchangeable, and morality itself as a word really isn't even necessary in the argument, because those are your goals and that's what makes the actions objective, is because those are the goals you're trying to achieve. And morality is just a label that you give to those goals. Am I misunderstanding, or is that relatively fair?
That's very fair. You're understanding me perfectly. That's the difference to me between the bottom up and the top down approach. So you're always going to have a definition game. All moral conversations are going to start with a battle over definitions. That's why we have, so for me, morality is, and yes, definitions are arbitrary. They have to be arbitrary. It's just sounds paired with meaning. Sorry?
I said just phonemes and morphemes, sort of weird person that studies psychology.
Right.
They're just signifiers that's all they are. They don't have intrinsic meaning.
Right. Well, I mean, we attribute meaning to the words we mean, but I don't think words mean anything like the meanings we intend for them, which is a point of view that people can and have disagreed with, but let's put that aside for now. My definition of morality as being synonymous with the project of maximizing happiness and health and well-being is no less arbitrary than, say, William Lane Craig's definition of morality, which is synonymous with that which God wants, or that which coheres with God's nature. So the question is just, so if I'm having a debate with somebody who has a completely different view of morality, when they use words like right and wrong, moral, immoral, they mean something completely different to me. That's when you just have to have the conversation about, okay, so which of our definitions is better suited to our actual intuitions about this? And so I would say that mine is. I would say that even like the idea of like heaven and hell, for example, that actually reduces to conscious suffering of conscious beings. That actually reduces to my idea of morality. And then we can play around with that. We can say, okay, so if morality really is by definition that which reflects God's nature or character, then suddenly, morality is based on what is good is based on what God happens to be, instead of God being good based on some external standard. And so that means that if God happened to have a nature of hate and lust and war and punishment, and all these like terrible dishonesty, all these things we can think of, well, then those would by definition be moral. Now that messes with our intuitions a little bit. Now that's a bullet that a Christian might be willing to bite. They have ways of not biting that bullet, which we can talk about. They say that God's nature is necessary, and I have a response to that. But that's a bullet that I don't have to bite. There's no scenario where something like rape, given the facts about our existence, can be made to be moral by definition. And so that's a liability that somebody like William Lane Craig has that I don't, or so I would argue. Did that answer?
Yeah, it answers some of my questions. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate your time in having this conversation with me, because it's something that I grapple. It's actually it's essentially the linchpin in my deconversion. I was reading the Bible and I realized that I was making moral assessments that were contra to what I was reading, and that it kind of clicked with me that if I'm able to make moral assessments and I'm having some dissonance and grappling with what I'm reading and trying to find justification for what I'm reading, then I'm clearly not imbued with morality based on this book that I'm reading. My morality is something that exists separately, and that kind of started a cascade for me. So which is one of the reasons that I find this conversation so interesting, because the realization that I had that internalized morality that was, separate, led me to, along quite a long path, but I'm still not able to fully articulate it, because it's a difficult thing to conceptualize, and then even more difficult to be able to articulate that conceptualization. So the next question that I have is, I'm not even certain this is a question. This is more a statement, and I wanted to kind of see how you feel. I have a difficult time understanding the theist conception of morality even more so, because to my mind, it seems as though they have an idea that morality was either dawned upon us, there seem to be two schools, that it was kind of zapped into our heads, essentially, or that it exists external of us and is something that we're trying to achieve. And I have trouble with the first, because it would mean that it would have to be unilateral, that conceptualization wouldn't be up for debate because it was zapped into all of our heads. So it would have to be the same in all of us, and it wouldn't be absent in anybody. And if it exists external to us and it's something that we're attempting to achieve, that almost seems a little bit ridiculous, because how do you attain it? There's absolutely nothing about it that would be revealed to you in a fashion that would allow you to know what it was. Like, you would have nothing to go by. I hear very furious typing.
And check.
Very furiously.
And check.
Somebody's really interested in what we're saying. So I was wondering if, from your perspective, where you've engaged in more of these conversations than I, do you see it in sort of the same fashion, or is there something that I'm missing, perhaps, so that I can make sure that when I'm going into these conversations with people, I'm representing them fairly and have a good understanding?
Yeah, that's always tough, because no two theists or deontologists or no two people have exactly the same thing in their head. I think. Right. If I put my Christian pastor hat on or something, I think they would say that it's probably both. I mean, there's moral facts or moral values, I think, is distinct from moral duties. And so moral values are out there in the ether. It's just what is right and what is wrong. And it is just a fact about, what's good and what's not. And of course, that fact is tethered to facts about God and God's nature and God's character. And that's one thing. That's about what makes something right or wrong, and the ontology of right and wrong. And then there's the communication of those values to us in the form of duties. And that they would argue, I assume, you need revelation for. And so it's something like the Bible, or some people, broaden the definition of revelation to not just scripture, but, revelation can be, a factory installed conscience in all of us that tells us what we ought to do and what we ought not to do. But duties are different from values. Duties are the obligations that I was talking about earlier that I kind of think are bullshit. And values are just the facts about what's right and wrong. The duties we get from revelation, the facts and the values are just ontologically what they are.
But then how do you account for disparities? Like, how would you account for people who have sociopathic tendencies, for example? You would have to omit them from the equation.
No,
I think the short answer to that is sin. I think most Christians are apostles.
Right, fallen world.
Is that what it is?
Yeah.
Is that what it is?
Oh, I really, that we're in a fallen world.
Shen, let me ask you something real quick about, okay, if I say something along the lines of stealing is wrong, and I say, hey, look, I've stolen I've stolen some bread from you. Okay, it is at that point an objective fact that that I'm an asshole. It is an objective fact, and it's also objective fact that you're more likely to go hungry. You're down. You've been harmed. You've been injured. There's been grievous against you. It's an objective fact that you're going to go without food if you have, a loaf of bread and I steal it from you. That is an objective fact of the matter. It is morally impermissible for me, based upon some kind of normative ethics. I tend to virtue ethics, but I have reasons why certain things are moral or immoral, right? Because I will judge that by which my standards from the normativity would be. But it's still an objective fact. You're going without food. you're going to starve because I took the piece of bread for you. So there is objective facts to be had here. I don't think morality is all subjective or all objective. First of all, these words are just conflated to no end in these discourses. But I think it could be both, right? And it isn't all or nothing. It isn't black and white. As somebody like myself who tends to like moral error theory, which is moral nihilism, I don't even think that moral propositions are true. I think they're all false. But that's just because of it's called an instantiation error. But when I see atheists so diehard, moral subjectivism, and then somebody like Capturing Christianity comes out with this video today, trying to argue against moral subjectivism, which he did a really bad job on. By the way, I was not impressed.
Oh, did I?
Skylar was not. Paul, you need to watch it. Oh, you watched it?
Okay.
Or you didn't watch it?
I have not. I have not.
Okay.
No. Yeah. I was working at my job like a loser.
You got one of those? Oh, good for you.
Yeah.
But there seems to be a lot of argument about the meta-ethical approach. When I got to tell you, I don't really care so much about persons' meta-ethical theories if they think a proposition is truth apt or true or false. Both the moral subjectivists and objectivists both think moral facts exist. So you say you're more subjectivist. The subjectivists will say the moral facts exist, but they're contingent upon individual biases and not interdependent or intersubjective agreement. But what I care about is, what are you going to do in this situation? I give you the situation. What are you going to do? What do you think is morally permissible, and what do you think is morally impermissible? And what I find on YouTube is I don't see a lot of people, theist or atheist, arguing those things, right? I want to know what you're going to do to make yourself an ethical person. Not you specifically, because you are an ethical person, but in general, why are they so fascinated by whether propositions are truth apt, if you're cognitivist, non-cognitivist, or if they're subjective or objective? Why don't we start discussing what it means to be an ethical person? I think that's the conversation that needs to be had. And I'm not hearing that much on YouTube a lot.
Well,
a little more
there's a difference between ethics and meta-ethics. I mean, ethics is the question of, well, what should we do in this situation?
Right,
I mean,
normative ethics, right.
And, meta-ethics.
I'm more interested in normative.
Yeah, well, you got my answer. I don't.
Do you agree with that? Do you think the normative? Really, what we want to know is your normative ethical theories. We want to know what you appeal to: deontological, consequentialism, virtue ethics. That's what makes something right or wrong in somebody's opinion. Those are the fascinating discussions. Not do you think that morals objective, subjective, because it doesn't get people where they want to go. It really doesn't. I tend to think morals can be objective. I'm fine with moral realism. I think it's a thing. I think obviously Scott does as well. Most philosophers do tend to moral realism, from what I find. But that doesn't mean anything. It's a meta-ethical approach. That's all.
But I think,
Steve,
any one of those, deontology, virtue ethics, consequentialism, I'm definitely a consequentialist, if anything. All of those treat morality as something objective, as that there are moral facts. I think. I mean, maybe there's somebody out there who considers themselves a relativist or a subjectivist who would also consider themselves a consequentialist. I don't quite know how that would work. But I mean, once you start talking about different moral theories, you're already you're past the page of, is it objective or subjective or relativistic or not? Or I mean, you've left that behind, and now you're like, okay, morality is a real thing. There are facts worth talking about. What's the best theory behind those facts? So I don't know.
Right. No, I would tend to agree with that as well. But there is the thing about moral relativism. It's actually can apply to normative ethical theories or meta-ethical theories and normative. These words have been used so many different ways by so many different philosophers and so many different papers that you really got to go, okay, which version are you using for this? And so that's one of the reasons why you say, well, how would I get consequentialism and moral relativism? It depends if you're talking normatively or meta-ethically, and so it's just a bunch of just hoopla at that point. Even I still get confused on this stuff. I read about this stuff all the time, and even I go, okay, what are we talking about here? Absolutism, universalism. It really, to me, boils down to, hey, are you a good person? What do you think it's ethical to steal from your employer if nobody else is watching? Those are the questions I think are the gauge of a person, right? It has nothing to do with.
But to be clear, you could still have like an antisocial personality disorder. You could still have somebody who's a terrible, terrible person whose meta-ethical worldview is mwah. I mean, you can be a great moral philosopher without being a good person, and we shouldn't confuse those two different conversations. And vice versa, you can be a really virtuous, upstanding person with an absolute shit, moral philosophy, meta-ethical philosophy too.
Kyle.
We know, trust us, we know, I got to tell you, Scott, we know a lot of people that I would consider to be, in my opinion, grossly unethical. I mean, to the point where I don't even think that they know what efficacy even means. I don't think they even have a clue what it would be to be an honest person. They do exist. Now, I don't know if that's because they're sociopaths. I don't know if they have no conscience. I don't know if that's their upbringing.
To be fair, they would
Speaking of
probably
which,
say the
no,
same thing about us.
Yeah, and you're right. No, that's the funniest thing. You're right. No, you're absolutely right on that, Kyle. They do project that, and they do think that we're the ones, and that's merely because. Yeah, but here's the difference. They merely think that because we are all non-believers. Even though I'm not an atheist, I'm still a non-believer. All of us are non-believers. We have that in common, right? So we don't have this this narrative that, oh, we have to have a deity to be an ethical person, because I think that's a very flawed approach. Because of what happens to that person when you ask them this question, and I do all the time, is, if your God ceased to be, would you still be an ethical person? Of course, the argument they're going to run is, oh, that can't happen. God's a metaphysical necessity, therefore he cannot cease to be. But they won't ever entertain a hypothetical for some reason.
There was an interesting moment. There was I think it was a debate between, this is tangentially related to what you just said, but it reminded me of it, and I always think this is a cool thing. But I think there was a debate between Craig and Shelley Kagan, and there was a moment where this never got addressed. It was just something he said in passing, and there was never a chance to respond to it or anything from the other side. But William Lane Craig said something like, the difference is, on my worldview, there's actually, in Christianity, there's an incentive for altruism. And I don't mean, like fake altruism. I mean like pure, selfless altruism. Christianity gives you an incentive to be totally altruistic, to do something good just for the sake of it being good, even if there's absolutely nothing in it for you. And I thought, that's got to be one of the most unself-aware, ironic claims.
That's self-refuting.
And he cited heaven. He said, well, yeah, heaven, because we have this idea of an afterlife. And I went, what? A question that I would love, and I have asked several Christian apologists this question, and the answer is never satisfactory, but the question is, okay, if you could go to hell so that I could get into heaven, would you do it?
Ooh.
And they never say yes.
Ooh.
So,
that's a good. It also goes along with
that's actually really.
Hitchens.
I was going to say that's damning, because that's what Jesus ostensibly did.
Exactly.
With Christopher Hitchens' line where he says, "Is there something that you can do, in religion that you can't do as an atheist?"
Oh yeah.
Free from the he always used the example of the homeless, feeding the homeless. As an atheist, you can just feed the homeless. That's it. That's the good act that you can do. You just feed the homeless. And he said, with Christianity, that comes along with this this screening, or this sit down and watch this video, or listen to this sermon, almost like you have to earn that meal that you're eating. And I think that's altruistic. That's hilarious.
They use it, to promote. Like, for example, you want to have the sandwich, you got to listen to the sermon stuff, which is obviously clearly not altruistic. I don't think altruism exists. I don't think true altruism is actually a thing. I don't think it's even possible. We always have some kind of self-serving interest, whether we recognize it or not. So the true altruism is just not a thing. But I love your question there, Scott. I don't think you actually. I mean, I wish I would have thought of this first. I'm actually a little pissed because that is really a good question. I'm pondering this in my head.
You can actually push it further. By the way. Yeah. That's me.
Is that original? That's really good, actually.
As far as I know, I mean, I'm sure some other people have said that, but as far as I know, I didn't get that from anywhere. But you can push it further too. You can say, okay, you wouldn't go to hell so that I could go to heaven. What would you go to hell for 3 atheists to go to heven? Still no.
Yeah, consequentially. Now you know what you're doing? You're literally doing the trolley problem right now.
Kind of thing. It is the trolley. By the way, somebody mentioned that, you know, the sort of parallel between that question and Jesus's purported sacrifice. The difference is Jesus went to, if he died for 3 days. At worst, he went to hell for 3 days and then got to rule the universe for eternity. Ask me if I would do that. Yes, I would do that. Any rational person would suffer for 3 days in order to rule the universe and have an eternity of bliss. As long as your cognitive functions are working, you would choose that. So it's not really the sacrifice it's made out to be.
Look, I'm gonna play devil's advocate here just for a second. Isn't some of the part of the Christian narrative, though, that Jesus, either on the cross or the Garden of Gethsemane, took upon all the sins, and that was what was considered to be the big thing, that he took on all the sins of everybody, and it was just, I mean, most excruciating pain you can imagine, kind of thing. Now, again, like you said, it wasn't an eternal pain. It wasn't, you know, being in hell forever, which, by the way, even as a non-believer, I find the whole thing about hell being hellfire to be absolutely mind-bogglingly bullshit. And even if you go through the history, you can see where that narrative started to come to be, right? I mean, so it's more of an argument in my background: believe like us, or you're going to hell. And I don't buy into that. But would you agree, though? There's a little bit more to it if you take the narrative that Jesus took all the sins in the world, and therefore that's what he's being rewarded for, even though he was already God to begin with. Which that's the confusing part.
I actually think that strengthens my point. So 3 days of suffering, right? 3 days of the most excruciating suffering you can imagine. Let's stipulate that. Followed by an eternity of bliss and ruling the universe. And it's not even that. That's not the only part of the transaction. The other part of the transaction is that, you know, you're saving billions and billions of souls. So taking on the sins of the world, that seems really, really abstract to me. I don't know how that translates to more suffering. To me, that would translate to less suffering. If I know that I am paying the price for billions and billions of people so that they get to live peacefully and blissfully forever, that makes it even more worth it. That incentivizes it even more. So I'm not just doing it for myself. If I were a good person, then like you just said, there's no such thing as true altruism, right? Well, that depends on whether you consider it selfish to feel good about having done the right thing. If that's selfish, then Jesus' sacrifice was selfish.
You just wrecked religion. Like in the past,
I ruined it.
In the past 4 minutes, you just wrecked.
I really would like SJ's response to some of this stuff. Maybe tomorrow night. She says you might have. I don't know if Scott's familiar with.
Oh, come on, SJ.
But she says maybe tomorrow night. But I would love SJ to respond to this. This is actually really good stuff. Actually, we don't really talk a lot about some of the actual things, problems about Christianity itself. So this is rare. But I'm fascinated by this. Yeah, we have all kinds. We talk about flat Earth a lot. That's what we do. We're just a flat Earth nowadays.
See, that's one where I would get the shit kicked out of me. I really would. If I tried doing, I would go into that conversation thinking I've got all this evidence, and then they would throw something at me that I've never even fucking heard of before, and I would go, "What? Hold on, let me."
Kyle, tell him some of this stuff. Go ahead, please.
Okay. Here's probably what you would encounter. Okay, this is. I'm gonna give you two real examples of things that people have said on this show that they genuinely believe. Number one, they can disprove gravity. It's called dropity, and it's because things are heavier than the air and they fall. And the reason, or the way that they can disprove gravity, is because trees grow up. Okay, that's number one.
That's
okay.
Which is true. Now, that's a fact.
You're not ready.
Well, not all trees.
You're not ready.
Most.
Number two.
You're not ready for this, Scott.
This one I'm still getting over. This guy named Edgewise. Everybody in the chat will remember who Edgewise is. Edgewise. Number one, he's a flat earther, but he used the Google Earth, which is a globe, to find I just find a sweet irony in that, to find a dragon, a fossilized dragon in the continent of Africa. He's scouring this continent of Africa, and he finds this fossilized dragon. Now, this dragon is a third of the size of the continent of Africa. And I asked him, I said, okay, so you have this planet. This dragon is a third the size of this continent. He's obviously taking up a big portion. What did he do? Where did he go? What did he eat? And his purpose was that he was sent by God down here because the continents were stacked on top of each other like a goddamn cheeseburger. And it took this dragon to separate the continents and place them where they are. And he, sadly enough, just rolled over and died in Africa. But yes, these are the arguments that I have absolute faith in you that you would be able to somehow refute.
Yeah. Okay. But I mean, forgive me, but it sounds like that's like the lowest hanging fruit in the flat Earth community. I mean, I have
not that much.
I know that I've encountered in passing videos or somebody saying something that sounds really scientific that's just clearly based on some misrepresentation of theories of science or whatever, and it actually does like that sounds ridiculous. But I've heard flat earthers argue in a way that sounds legitimate, and you would actually have to Google the terms that they're using, or should I say abusing, in order to dissect, what it is they're talking about. So I know that. Listen, I know this because I made this mistake. The biggest mistake you can make is going into a conversation like that thinking all the evidence is on your side, which it may be, but you still don't know what they're going to throw at you until you've had the conversation 100 times and you know the different permutations
Good point.
that it can take. So I would never be, and this is just from me having experienced beatdown after beatdown, but I wouldn't be cocky enough to think that I could take on a sophisticated flat earther just because of the fact that I'm a sane, normal, high school educated, human being, and the evidence is on my side. I don't think that's...
If you can find a sophisticated flat earther, please send them our way. We've been looking for one for about a year and a half now.
No, I'm glad you're self-aware. You're self-aware of that. I think that's admirable because I have seen people get ripped apart by flat earthers that went in with it, because obviously the evidence and the science is on the rounder side. But if you don't, for example, G-Man went in and got ripped apart by flat earthers. Because he didn't. Now, I'm not trying to compare Scott to flat Earth, but I'm saying that people even
G-Man?
Well, yeah, but G-Man, we all agree is an idiot. Yes, but I'm sorry. I can't say he's an idiot because that'd be insulting. So I can say that he says some idiotic things. Is that better, Shannon?
Yeah, I think the issue is that you need to be able to have enough knowledge to quickly identify where they're lying or misrepresenting and immediately debunk it. And a lot of them speak about things like light refraction. I know what they're saying is probably horse shit, but I'm not knowledgeable enough in that field that I would be able to say this is right. But the best thing I could say, I know the earth is round, you guys are lying, but I could demonstrate on my feet why about refraction, for example.
Shannon, let me while we're talking about the arguments against religion and the really good ones, you and Paul actually in a conversation with SJ had one of the best arguments that I've heard for or against religion, and that is the argument about Paul and Paul's mother. If Paul's mother goes to
if
heaven,
religion is true.
Yeah, can you tell everyone that one, because I thought this was brilliant as well. And Scott, you can tell us what you think.
So Paul's my boyfriend's name. He has a channel called Paulogia. For anybody who's not familiar, it's brilliant. He's wonderful.
Right.
We had a conversation, and part of the conversation was him recounting the fact that he is now an atheist, but his mother is still a very, very, very devout believer, very God-fearing woman. And if everything that she believes is true, and she loves him very much, and they have a fantastic relationship, when they both pass away, she's going to heaven and he's going to hell, and she knows that he's going to be in hell. So my question was essentially, what about when she goes to heaven? How can she conceivably be happy knowing that her son is burning forever in hell? She's either going to be miserable in heaven, or something about the essence of you as a person is going to have to fundamentally change. And what does that mean for free will? If God makes you happy about your child burning in hell, just be happy, you're no longer you. So there goes your free will argument. And what would you want to go to heaven if that means that you're no longer you? Like, there's no way I could reconcile it. I mean, I have a son, I have an 8-year-old. I lose my mind when he stubs his toe because I hate to see him in pain. I couldn't imagine him suffering for eternity while I was drinking Mai Tais on the beach being happy, knowing that that was taking place. And nobody's been able to give me a good, or Paul, a good answer for that, because there isn't one, is why.
Well, there is a good answer.
No
hell, there is a good answer. That version of hell is bullshit.
No, a good answer if you believe
That's
in
not
hell.
an answer, Steve. That's just eliminating hell from the equation. That's becoming nihilistic about hell.
That's so funny. I did a video on exactly this. It was called My Dear Christian,
Did you?
and it's old. It's an old one, and I was being really stupid and theatrical. I was like playing with a lighter because I thought it was cool but my point was basically to create a trilemma, and I said there's 3 possibilities. See if I can get this right. It's been 12 years since I made this video, but it was something like there's 3 possibilities. Either I go to heaven knowing that people I love, people who are loving, ethical, kind, caring human beings, people in my life, people I care about. I go to heaven knowing that these people are suffering eternally and with no reward at the end. There's no upside to it. I go to heaven knowing this. If I'm me still, which is basically what you said, then it's no heaven at all. In fact, it's its own kind of hell, as any parent would realize. If I have to be fundamentally changed, my psychology or my mental states have to actually be changed in order for me to be okay with someone I love, someone who I cared for suffering eternally.
And that's
then
not you
it's
in
not
heaven.
actually me in heaven. And the third option is that if my natural earthly character is such that I have no problem with somebody being tortured eternally while I'm, like you said, sipping Mai Tais, then the idea of heaven is a sham because all the evil people are in heaven or something like that. But there didn't seem to be any. Even in comments, I don't remember anybody giving a satisfying answer to that.
Most people either when I am in these conversations, most people either eliminate hell, which is actually what Paul's mother in an honest. That's how she reconciled herself with that, so that she could just live a life and be happy now because the thought wrecked her so much.
So she's
that
actually impacted her enough that she's an annihilationist now?
Yes, and she's a devout Mennonite, but it impacted her enough, just the thought of that, because she's that devout, that she became an annihilationist for that reason. Or people say, well, my child would never. Or they say, the really reprehensible say, if God decides that they're in hell, when I get there, God will imbue me with the knowledge, know that they deserve it.
Shannon, you might want to refresh your choppy
I'll
again.
do it again.
Yeah, annihilationism actually makes more sense to me. Nephilim Free's annihilationist. I don't know if you know that.
Well, even if you eliminate hell as an option, you're still, like, as a family member, you're still actively going to be.
Oh no, I'm good. I have at least
we should be back
probably
on now.
half an hour at least,
Okay,
maybe 45, even an hour.
Cool.
7. Yeah, I bet you have got an hour at least.
Excellent.
Okay, so we're back. We're back, Dave.
Yeah, it's streaming again.
Okay,
cool. So we were just talking about Shannon's question about that you're not with your loved one, or there's going to be some mechanism by which you don't know, or you're not acknowledging, or you're forgetting that happened. And then the question becomes, is that really you? Is that fundamentally you that is there,
and
praising and worshiping for eternity?
Like, can you be unhappy in heaven? The most sophisticated argument that I've heard is that hell isn't a hell, like the fire hell. Hell is just separation from God, whatever ubiquitous nonsense that is. So hell is just separation from God. if you are in heaven, you get to be with God. And if you aren't in heaven, you're just eternally separated from God. But that still means that somebody that you love, that's been a part of you and a part of your life, and somebody that you're attached to, you are separated from them for eternity. How do you stop caring about that? How do
you also feel bad for them too, right? I mean, you're like you said, I'm going to use the analogy of you're on the beach sipping margaritas, and you're knowing that somebody else is not with you, indulging in that they're not having the same experience even with you, and so that would actually, in my opinion, make you feel, sad for them in some way, right? I mean, you feel, I wish my family was here enjoying these awesome Mai Tais with me, and they're not.
And you'd feel their absence. You'd miss them yourself too. I mean, psychologically, you develop attachments to people. Like, those social bonds are our lives, essentially. Our life is the constitution of all of our experiences, and our experiences almost invariably involve other people. So if you spend your life, your eternity, separated from those other people, not knowing, even if you don't know what happened to them, that's a loss. You are going to heaven mourning. Should you be mourning in heaven? What is heaven if it's a place where you mourn?
I think Christopher Hitchens took this line, but I can't conceive of heaven as being anything but torture anyway. Even if everybody you knew were in heaven, even if you controlled for all these issues that we're bringing up, I think experiencing anything forever
with this exact setup for 4 or 5 hours to my channel as a test, same settings and everything. I don't know why it does
dude, it's
this.
90 minutes in every time. I don't know what it is. Scott,
don't follow me.
What's that?
Don't follow me while we have a second, okay?
All right.
Yeah,
I'll be right back.
All right.
Dave, close out all of the inputs that you're not using. Close out the intro, videos, anything that is not like bare bones. Close it out. Stop the animations on the screen. And then
everything.
let's see if that doesn't hold out.
Shut her down.
But it's circumstantial because, like I said, I've ran it with everything running before. Like, I don't understand what it does.
Anything that's pulling possible
resources.
Resources. Just shut them down. Just pause everything. Yeah. People know the Patreon thing and the hit and likes thing, and they see our beautiful faces over there to the right. It doesn't have to spin. We're going bare bones.
My computer is actually powering the Large Hadron Collider. Is that going to be a problem?
God damn it, Scott! I knew it.
Actually,
we have actually people that will come in to argue that is actually creating black holes that will swallow the Earth and actually releasing Satan from the depths of hell. You do realize that, right? Yeah. So don't joke about those things because people will believe you.
Religion, they don't get to mix black holes and Satan. Can
I take it back? Can I take it back a step because Scott made me think there for a second, and when I think, what happens? It's a free for all. But this can I take that argument and actually run into its natural course? Because I don't think you ran it further enough. What would happen? Because your argument was if somebody's being altruistic, that they will give up their place in heaven for you, and you go to heaven and they go to hell, right? Now, if we ran that to its natural extension, if every good person, every good Christian gave up their spot for an evil, demonic atheist or anti-theist like Shannon and Kyle or non-believer like myself, then all the bad people are going to end up in heaven and all the good people are going to end up in hell. This could be an actual natural consequence from this, could it not be?
Well, that's the thing about Christianity. Christianity stipulates that there are no good people. We're all bad. The only difference is people who accept forgiveness, or actually the truth is, if they're being honest, know that there is even an offer of forgiveness able to be taken, and the people that don't. But there's all of Christian theology is predicated on the idea that everyone is bad, and everyone is not just bad but equally bad in the eyes of God.
I can word it differently if that's your sticking point. I can say all the people that lived their whole lives dedicated to Christ now end up in hell, and all the people that did whatever the hell they wanted and to give a fuck one way or another, they all end up in heaven. I think that'd be a bad plan for God, would it not? I don't think that'd have the intended consequences that he was looking for, would it not? But it's possible, is it not? I'm literally seeing this in my head, how this would not be a natural consequence from what you were saying earlier.
If he's God, you
If
can't derail him from his intended. If he's God,
Yeah.
then that's what God would have wanted anyway. There's no way you can change his plan. That would have had to have been his plan. If it happened, it was his plan.
He just
the thought experiment
plan all
really,
along for bad people to go to heaven. Okay.
So it sounds like, Steve, what you're articulating is a reply to the argument, or a rebuttal to the argument, saying, yeah, but it's not really altruistic then, is it, if all I'm doing is causing a bunch of bad stuff to happen? So why would
really
I
not
give up
altruistic, right?
heaven so that you can have a good place in heaven when you're not a good person, or you're not worthy of being in heaven? That's not really altruism, because I'm not doing a good thing. It's also not altruism to give $1 million to a psychopath. So that's the but, and I hear that, but the thought experiment really is, I mean, when I pose it to a Christian, I'm careful to control for that. And I'll say, if God came to you and said, listen, here's a guy, here's Scott over here, and Scott tries to live an ethical life. He just has the wrong set of beliefs. And, if he knew that Scott is the kind of person that if he knew I existed, he would embrace me, and blah, 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 blah. So if it's God that's posing the question, then you kind of eliminate the ethical issue with it, really, or at least I try to control for that.
Who's really the bad person? Like, since we're all talking about like our favorite arguments and stuff, mine is the possibility that Satan wasn't the bad guy in the Garden of Eden, if we're going to take that story to be true. Exactly, but you have to think about it this way too. This is what I think. If you have the planet as it is now, we're just going to assume it was the same size back then, and you've only created 2 people, and you put those 2 people on a location on this planet, and you have a tree that if one of these people takes the fruit off of, is going to cause all of these years of torment and sin and just
collider.
I'm sorry,
everyone's life.
It's what I'm plugging my PlayStation into. I can't help it.
Dave,
okay,
Dave,
that's fair.
Dave, stop
Mine's
the
plugged
stream.
into a power bar,
Stop the stream and start it back again.
That's what I've been doing, Kyle. That's how I've
misery and sin and all this. Why would you put the tree in the middle of the place where the 2 people that can partake of that tree and cause all this misery are? Why not just put it on the other side of the planet, or not do it at all, knowing as God, everything and what's going to happen, and that this is actually going to be a thing? And Scott was saying that there was another issue that could be raised with that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think the sort of stock answer to that is something like, well, that's the point. I mean, the point is to give them free will and then give them an opportunity to exercise it. If I don't give any kind of resistance, if I don't give them any kind of rules worth breaking, then what is the virtue in following my orders if every order I give just leads to more and more enjoyment? So I have to give them something to test, to balance out, loyalty versus pleasure. Okay, fine, I get all that. But the other problem is this tree is the tree of knowledge of good and evil. So presumably, by the reason we all have a conscience, basically, the reason that we all have innate knowledge, theologically speaking, of good and evil, is because our ancestors ate from the fruit of this tree, right? But prior to eating that fruit, how do you know that it's wrong to disobey God's orders? Because you don't have knowledge.
It's a catch-22 situation.
Yeah,
you don't have the knowledge to know that it's wrong to eat the fruit.
Right.
That's an evil deed. Anything that you do that goes against God's word would be in the Christian theology inherently evil, right? Anything you do that is opposed to God is by necessity evil. But I like the soul building.
Mens rea actus rea, though, Steve. Though.
What's that?
Between mens rea actus rea, there's difference between
mens rea. Is that what you're saying?
Mens rea actus rea. There's because there's a difference between malicious intent and malicious action. You could do a malicious action with no intent. If they didn't have any knowledge that it was evil, they couldn't conceivably have had.
Then how they held accountable if they don't have mental.
Had all these. By the way, like podcasts and stuff with people that were worse than this. So if you're concerned at all that this is like annoying, it's not. And plus we get breathers in between to talk. So don't worry about like my time or anything. I know you guys have
annoying to us.
Too,
this is $1,200 software that this would work perfectly.
I'm not sure about this in general.
Okay, let's do this then. Since thank you for working with us, Scott. They've completely stopped the stream and started a new thing, and I'll just piece them together.
That's totally cool. That's what you would do with the breaks that we've already had, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and then what I usually do is I turn it into an actual podcast afterwards.
When it renders, the weird thing is when we have these dips. The weird thing is when we have these dips, and it comes back, it will render fine. Like it will come out. The final video will be fine. It'll just have these little holes where we kind of like we jump back. Stopping this is when I'll kind of combine them together. But the way YouTube works is very strange. If we do this kind of like in and out thing like we have been doing, it'll render fine. Like when the video's stopped and we're done streaming, it'll be a complete full video. It's very weird.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, because it takes it from the intake of YouTube and then it pieces it all together if there's not a hard break. The hard break, then it starts a new video.
We're back.
All right, guys. Guys, we're going to stop this stream and start a new one so that we can hopefully clear out what's wrong with the this particular stream. So we're going to stop this and then reboot here in just a couple of minutes.
Does that mean I close this whole window and then you send me a new link?
You can stay on. Yeah, you can just stay on. He's going to start it from a new on YouTube's end, like a stream now thing.
Oh, okay.
And then we'll start talking about quantum mechanics, astrophysics, and biochemistry because those are.
So you
want
me
to talk about that? I'll just listen with a stupid look on.
Let me get this straight. You want me to stop the stream?
Correct.
And
start